Ladies and gentlemen, this is a warning. Thank you.
The city of Lansing, Michigan is the state's capital. Located in almost the center of the Lower Peninsula, it is the sixth largest city in the state. While the automotive industry has been and still remains a major player in the city, unlike other cities such as Flint or Detroit, Lansing has a diversified economy with government jobs, healthcare industry, and Michigan State University. The sprawling 5,000-plus acre campus is one of the largest university campuses in the entire United States. The Grand River winds through the forested grounds as well as through the city itself. To the northeast of Lansing lies a concentration of parks and small lakes, while farmland surrounds much of the other sides of the urban city. While thousands come to Lansing to work in the day, many do not live here, as it has the second highest crime rate in the state and is ranked as the 16th most dangerous city in America. The police department employs one full-time detective to work on its open cold cases, which was called grossly understaffed by the police chief in 2021, when reports suggested hiring an additional detective in support of staff. 4 years later, the cold case unit still consists of just one detective, while the crime rate in Lansing rises. The city website has a very transparent and helpful listing of all unsolved cases by decade and year. And it is using this search that one can find a number of young to middle-aged women who all met similar fates between the 1970s and early 1990s. Police speculated that a single killer was responsible for the first wave of killings, which seemingly stopped after one woman survived. But just a few years later, young women in Lansing began to be murdered again in a similar fashion. Had the serial killer prowling Michigan's capital city returned, or had someone new taken his place?
Goes on in San Francisco for the man known as the Zodiac Killer.
There could be a serial killer in Chicago.
The Oakland County child killer.
Phantom Killer.
Frankfurt slasher.
4 children have now been murdered.
Has killed 5 and says he's going to kill again.
15 brutally murdered young women.
The pattern is the same.
One by one,
the death count started rising.
A man in a mask robbed, tied, and stabbed them.
Strangled, stuffed in burlap bags.
It is highly unlikely that these women were murdered by separate men.
Where will the killer strike next?
Police can't answer who or why.
That's the question that we'll never know.
I don't want to live the rest of my life wondering if this person's going to be caught.
I believe that there's someone out there that has knowledge.
And he's probably still at large.
If you know Irene Road, you know we value our privacy. But in our personal life, it's not always easy to maintain. Whether we know it or not, sites will mine our data like full name, email, health records, and more, which they will sell to scammers, spammers, and anyone else who wants to snoop. That's why we started using Aura, the sponsor of today's video. Aura shows us which data brokers are selling our personal information and automatically submits opt-out requests on our behalf. This not only reduces the amount of spam you'll get, but protects against hackers who can use this information to gain access to our social media, bank accounts, and other sensitive information. Aura also provides a ton of other features bundled into one easy-to-use app at an affordable price. You get antivirus, VPN, password management, parental controls, identity theft insurance, and more without needing to bother with different apps. We all have one or more of these tools already, but not having Aura is like locking the front door and leaving the back door wide open. And if you're a regular viewer, you'll know how often that happens. Like 24-hour security, motion sensors, and guard dogs, Aura is always on, doing the hard work of keeping my info safe so I can focus on other tasks with peace of mind. Relaxing. RuneRoad values our privacy, and we also value yours. Go to aura.com/runeroad to start a free 2-week trial, also linked below in the description. Our first case is one that took place 2 years before the killings began happening much faster, and her case would be considered the first in the string of murders. 18-year-old Marie Ann Jackson had graduated high school the previous year and had begun working as a waitress at Sully's Drive-In restaurant on Cedar Street. It was Friday the 13th, November 1970, when Marie was last seen at this McDonald's on 47 South Cedar with a tall man described as between 30 and 35 years old with light brown hair driving a beat-up Oldsmobile. After she did not come to work the following day, a search was launched. It was Saturday, November 21st, when a deer hunter would find the body of a woman on land owned by Michigan State University. Clothed in just her tennis shoes, Marie had been sexually assaulted before being strangled. Her bra wrapped around her neck and her body dumped about 50 feet up a small dirt road off of Sandhill Road in an area referred to as a lover's lane by MSU students. Police released a report stating they did not believe the earlier year's murder of 16-year-old Lori Merningham was related, despite both girls being strangled and dumped in the woods. Lori was the daughter of former Mayor Max Merningham and was kidnapped from the gift shop she worked at after police believed an African-American man who was robbing the store panicked, believing he had killed the owner, and so he took that girl. Her body was found in a swampy area 17 miles southeast of Lansing. It was July 24th, 1972, when 19-year-old Diane Osinski answered the phone on her off-campus boarding house at 709 Grove Street. The junior MSU student studying psychology had been looking for a summer job and was excited when the caller offered her a babysitting gig. That same man would call back later in the day, telling her she was late to the meeting, and Diane rushed out of her apartment, never to return. The search for the missing girl would continue, but for her family, as more murders happened, their hope for positive news dwindled. Meanwhile, it was August 11th that year when 43-year-old Betty Jean Goodrich would go shopping at the Meyer grocery store on West Saginaw, west of the city proper. The mother of four's car would be found left in the lot, but Betty had disappeared. Police stated they were looking for a dark gold or blue 1972 Oldsmobile in connection with the abduction. 2 days later, a pair of boys riding a motorcycle along a wooded trail on their family's land would spot Betty's body. Located about 1,000 feet off of Bain Road in Hastings, police stated the woman had been stabbed 4 times and strangled with a belt that was left wrapped around her neck. Eight days after her disappearance, another case bearing eerie similarities to Diane Osinski's case would happen just 6 blocks north of the Capitol building. 58-year-old Irene Waters lived in an upstairs apartment of this home with her mother. Irene volunteered as her church's Sunday school superintendent and worked at a local doctor's office. It was 5 a.m. on August 19th when someone phoned the house telling Irene that her workplace had caught fire and they desperately needed her to come in and help go through the files. Her mother begged her not to leave, but Irene felt it was her duty and left the home out the back and got into her car parked in the garage. Once she was inside, a man rushed up to her and stabbed her to death. The neighborhood awoke to the woman's screams, and one man caught a glimpse of a 35-ish-year-old stocky white male in dark frame glasses, running down the alleyway away from the garage. Initially, police stated they did not believe the murders were linked, but in later years stated they did believe that the Waters, Goodrich, and Osinski cases were linked and had a suspect who was serving time for a different sexual assault. Meanwhile, by November 1972, Diane Osinski was still missing, and the family's outlook was grim. Her grandmother had taken the $1,000 bond she had saved for the girl as a future marriage gift and instead offered it up as a reward for finding the girl's body, stating she hoped it would motivate someone to look harder. It was 2 months later when a murder bearing similarities would occur in Owasso, a small city halfway between Lansing and Flint. 20-year-old mother-to-one Dawn Magyar had gone to the Yankee department store, formerly located in this shopping plaza. After failing to return home that night, her husband phoned police and her vehicle was found still left in the parking lot, the keys sitting on the ground beside it. Over 4,000 people would help search for the woman, with no luck. Back in Lansing, another girl would go missing. It was February 22nd when 19-year-old Diane Littlefield vanished after leaving her boyfriend's apartment just over 2,000 feet east of where Diane Osinski lived. Fearing the worst, her family would match the $1,000 reward for Diane Osinski's whereabouts. 3 missing girls. The families could only wait for answers, but only one of them would be given positive news. It was March 4th that year when 2 boys out tapping maple trees on their farm in Chapin, a town 15 miles northwest of Owasso, would spot the body of Dawn on their property. Two months later, the other 2 disappearances would also be solved. This is the Rose Lake State Wildlife Area. Taking up over 4,100 acres of land, it is located about 12 miles northeast of Lansing. While the majority of the land is hiking trails, there are also natural sections used for hunting. It is in one of these densely wooded areas that 2 teenagers came to on May 9, 1973 to do some mushroom hunting. This same area was also noted as being another lover's lane, and police had even reportedly busted the filming of an orgy nearby. But that day, the mushroom hunters would find more than discarded beer cans and condoms. They would find a skeleton. In an incredibly callous move, police told both Diane Osinski and Diane Littlefield's families that the skeleton was likely one of their daughters, forcing them to wait the 2 days until dental records would come back. In addition to the orgy bust, conservation employees said a hunter had set traps just 30 feet from the body in October. But because the corpse had been placed behind several fallen trees, it had been hidden from his view as well as from helicopters that searched the area earlier for the missing girl. Less than a month later, the Littlefield family would find out what happened to their daughter as well. Diane had been found alive and well in Duxburg, Massachusetts. That girl would tell police that her relationship with her boyfriend had cooled off, so she simply decided to hitchhike and begin a new life. Despite fearing these cases linked to a single individual, police had no leads. But just a few days after Diane Littlefield was found alive, police would get what they desperately needed: a survivor. It was the night of June 12th when 20-year-old Sally Mae Pazitska was walking west along the sidewalk of East Kalamazoo about here when a man in a medium green car pulled over to ask for directions. As she leaned in to give him help, he pulled a pistol and yanked her into the car, speeding out of the city to the north and turning onto State Road East. As they neared the intersection with Wood Road, next to Granger Meadows Park, his car hit some gravel and began to spin out, forcing him to hit his brakes. It was then that Sally jumped out of the car and ran until another car picked her up. Sally described her kidnapper as a stocky man between 35 and 40, with sandy, curly hair and a mustache. Detectives stated Pazitska closely resembled Diane Ozinski and Dawn Magyar, as well as matching the circumstances of Betty Jean Goodrich's abduction. They pled with the public to come forward if they had any information on these cases, stating that this was the first good lead they had. But if anyone knew anything, they did not come forward. And it would be almost a year to the day of Pazitska's abduction that the police would get their next clue. On June 9, 1974, a group of boys were swimming in the Shiawassee River in downtown Owasso when one of them stepped on something that felt a little strange. The boy would reach down into the water, pulling out a revolver that seemed to have been tossed off from the nearby bridge. Though it was heavily rusted, police were able to ascertain it was the murder weapon of Dawn Magyar and traced it as purchased from a pawn shop in Yuma, Arizona by a man named Robert Shaw. But the investigation would stall after they were unable to locate that man. Meanwhile, the same day the revolver was found, newspapers ran a story about someone else who had made a discovery at the rest stop 8 miles north of Owasso just 2 days earlier. Though today just a gazebo stands at this county park next to Shiawassee River, in 1974, there was a restroom here where the battered body of 30-year-old Pamela Hill was found dumped in the men's bathroom. She had been stabbed to death elsewhere and left here. The mother of two's purse, glasses, and scarf were found behind a tavern nearby, though Pam was not known to visit bars. She was found dressed in just her panties, and police stated they had several suspects but were also investigating the murder to see if it was linked to Dawn Magyar's, due to both women living in Chesaning. Back in Lansing, police would reopen the Irene Waters case in 1975 and find 2 separate suspects almost immediately. The first was Gary Addison Taylor, a man arrested in Texas for a series of sexual assaults who confessed to murdering 4 women in 3 different states. The Michigan native began his crime spree in Florida, where he would attack women with a hammer at bus stops late at night in his teen years. He was released from juvie in 1957 and moved back to Michigan, where he became known as the Royal Oak Sniper, non-fatally shooting women on the streets at night. He would be transferred between psychiatric hospitals, and despite stating he had compulsions to hurt women, he was kept as an outpatient until he stopped showing up for treatments in 1973. After his later arrest in Texas, he confessed to murdering 4 women in the early 20s. Taylor was suspected in as many as 20 other unsolved murders in Texas, California, and Michigan, but he would not confess to any. The following month, police would arrest Neil Haynes for several assaults on women at a Lansing park by knife point. This is the entrance to Potter Park, just south of downtown. It was here that a man pulled at least 3 separate women into the bushes and sexually assaulted 2, while a third managed to escape. Police would set up a stakeout and just a few hours later arrest 31-year-old Neil Haynes, a man who had been arrested previously in 1966 for kidnapping a girl in a method similar to the abduction of Sally Pazitska. That kidnapping had occurred just days after the murder of a housewife in Grand Ledge, a small city less than 10 miles west of Lansing. It was July 7th, 1966, when a man came to the home of Betty Reynolds and began speaking to her. Seeming to know him, Betty would send her 2 children to go play at a neighbor's house while she let him inside. When those kids returned home later, they found a broken window and blood on the floor. After phoning police, a dog would find the nude body of Betty several hundred yards behind her home on the banks of the Grand River. Her hands were tied behind her back and she had been stabbed to death, leaving her head nearly severed. Take a look at the sketch of that suspect compared to the one in the Irene Waters case. Further searching would turn up that the kitchen knife murder weapon was discarded in the home's trash can, and it was theorized the killer had waited for the children to return home, both scared off. Police would put the children in protective custody and release the sketch, which alerted police in Neal's arrest. But he would be brushed aside when 25-year-old Richard Herr was arrested for the murder. Herr would confess to having gone to the Reynolds home that day to get documents signed for a car Betty and her husband had purchased from him, but that he had left before somebody else must have killed her. Though a doctor was willing to testify Herr was at his office at the time of the crime, his palm print was found on the murder weapon, and he accepted a plea deal. Richard Herr would maintain his innocence, saying he was railroaded due to his familial ties to the mob, and after his release, he would move to Arizona, where he became a Toys for Tots Santa Claus. Haynes would go to court in 1975 on just the Potter Park assaults. But meanwhile, the attacks on women in the Lansing area would not stop. In fact, they were about to get much worse. Stacy Roast and Maureen Nichols were seniors at Charlotte High School, a small city just southwest of Lansing. To celebrate the summer, the pair went camping at Priggerus Park, a small lake and campground just west of Rose Lake, north of Lansing. The girls arrived on Thursday, June 10, 1975, and were known to have attended several parties in the park, which was known as a party area for teens. The two girls had told their parents they would be camping somewhere else, and after their other friends' parents refused to let them go to Priggerus Park, Roast and Nichols went by themselves. They would be reported missing that Sunday when a friend who came to pick them up found their campsite abandoned and no sign of the girls. Despite there being no signs of foul play, police did take the matter seriously, searching the entire park by foot and helicopter, but no sign of either girl were found. After that, police stated they were on the opinion that the girls had either voluntarily left on their own or were abducted. That opinion would change on June 28th that year, when a farmer taking a break from plowing would find a badly decomposed body in this wooded field on his property, which was just south of the newly opened Sleepy Hollow State Park, about 8 miles north of Priggerus Park. Another extensive search of the area was conducted, while the families of both girls were asked to provide dental records to identify the body, which would turn out to be Maureen Nichols. She had died from at least 9 stab wounds. It was August 11th that year when police were called to a farm 4.5 miles southeast of where Nichols was found, when the farm owner's dog brought him back a human skull. In another wooded lot 250 yards from the home, here, the body of Stacy Roast was found. A reward fund was started and a secret witness tip line was opened on the murders. The next unsolved murder would not take place for another 4 years. But that does not mean the Lansing streets were safe during that time. In fact, between 1976 and 1978, a serial killer had begun to prowl the streets of Lansing, and both his methods of attack and his victim selection were frighteningly similar. It was New Year's Eve of 1976 when 19-year-old Martha Sue Young went missing after a date with her fiancé, Donald Miller. The next year for the Youngs would play out much in the similar way as it had previously for Diane Osinski's family. Searches proved fruitless, and rewards went unclaimed. In fact, in March 1977, police would search the same areas near Sleepy Hollow State Park and did find a body, though it would turn out to be an African American male. Then, in August that year, 2 boys were seen playing with a skull near St. Joseph Cemetery northwest of the city. Another search was conducted in the surrounding woods when it was ascertained to be a young female skull that was not from the cemetery, and it was feared that it was Martha's. On October 20th, 1977, 2 men were hunting pheasants in the swampland of Progress Park when they came upon something strange. Laying out neatly on the ground was the clothing and purse of Martha Young. Her underwear was even inside the pants, as though she had simply dissipated. 150 National Guardsmen, along with 60 volunteers, tracking dogs, and helicopters combed the park, but would turn up no further evidence. The following year, 27-year-old Marita Choquette went missing from her second-story apartment off of Pine Street in Grand Ledge on June 14, 1978. Police would find the single woman's car left in the WKAR-TV parking lot on the MSU campus, where she worked as an assistant editor. They noted the similarities between Choquette and Young's disappearances when 2 weeks later, the decomposed body of a young female was found in the woods outside of Holt, Michigan. Just off of the intersection of Okemos and Willoughby Roads in a small woodlot used to dump trash, the property owner smelled a foul stench coming from underneath a pile of cinder blocks. Dental records would confirm the body underneath was Marita's. She had been stabbed 17 times, and her hands were cut off. On the same day Marita was found, 21-year-old MSU student Wendy Bush went missing after last seen walking with a Caucasian male near the university library. Leads in all 3 cases had gone cold when 30-year-old junior high school teacher Christine Stewart went missing while walking home after dropping her car off at Herm's Auto Body on August 14th. Police would launch another massive search through nearby Henry Fine Park when her glasses were found on the sidewalk of Fair Oaks Court, about a block away from her house. The community was tense with fear of this recent rash of disappearances, when just 2 days later, a man knocked on the door of this home in South Lansing, asking if he could use the phone. Finding just 14-year-old Lisa Gilbert was home alone, he tied her up and proceeded to beat and assault her until her 13-year-old brother, Randy Gilbert, came home. As Randy and the man struggled, the naked and bound Lisa managed to escape the house, promptly drawing the attention of passing motorists, as she ran down the street screaming. Witnesses would note the attacker's license plate on his Oldsmobile Cutlass as he sped off after he strangled and slit the throat of Randy, who miraculously survived. 1 hour later, police tracked the owner down to his home on Gainsborough Street in East Lansing, and they would arrest 23-year-old Donald Gene Miller. Miller, who was the fiancé of Martha Sue Young, had been looked at in her disappearance, but nothing was found to stick. Now, however, police searched for links between Miller and all 4 of these last women. Though claiming he had multiple personality disorder, Donald Miller was found sane and sentenced to 50 years for just the Gilbert attack, while the state built their case on the other 4 missing women. A month after his conviction, Miller made a plea deal. He would show them the locations of the 3 missing girls' remains if he would not receive a life imprisonment sentencing. The deal was accepted, and on July 16th, the search began as Donald Miller took detectives back to Priggers Park where Martha Sue Young's body was buried at the base of a tree in a thicket. Next was Christine Stewart, who had been placed in a farm fields drainage ditch near Jason Road and US 27, some 12 miles north of Lansing and a straight 6¼ miles from where Maureen Nichols had been dumped 3 years prior. Miller would confess to killing Chuckette and stated he had to cut her hands off because the key for the handcuffs he had used on her was broken and he could not get them off. Finally, after a lengthy questioning, Miller confessed to Wendy Bush's murder as well, who he had known previously. He said that he strangled her and dumped her next to this fence just south of what at that time was the end of Broadbent Road before it was extended for a new subdivision. Because of his plea deal, Miller has been eligible for parole since 2018. So far, he has been denied every application, but his full sentence will be served by 2031. Back to 1979, with Miller behind bars, people yet again would relax. But less than 1 month after the bodies of Miller's victims were found, another young girl would be abducted from the street. It was Sunday night, August 5th, 1979, when 14-year-old Karen Oatley went for a bike ride. Born nearly deaf, Karen had made great strides to learn how to lip read and, with the help of hearing aids, had been able to attend regular public school. Police were phoned when she didn't arrive home 4 hours later, and her grandfather would find her bike discarded near Gardner School, where she attended. Not long after, police searching the woods behind the middle school would find Karen's body. She had been strangled and her throat was slashed. The woods were known as a hangout spot and frequently used as a shortcut for students to go to the Kmart on the other side of them, and police stated they questioned all the boys in the neighborhood. Several other locals were questioned and released, including one known as the quote, hair man, a man known to have a hair fetish, and police found a trash bag with almost 300 photographs of him with girls and boys, particularly ones with long hair. Inside that bag was also an article on Karen's disappearance with a photo of a different long-haired girl stapled to it. With no concrete evidence, he too was released. As the 70s ended and Michigan entered into the 1980s, the state saw an economic crisis as its big 3 automotive businesses continued to leave the state. By 1982, unemployment had hit a record high of 17.2%. and state budget cuts totaled $778 million. The following year would see Chrysler come back from financial issues, and the state as a whole was moving back towards stability. Leads on the previous decade's park murders had all dried up, but a new round of crimes were about to begin, and this time, a task force would be formed to look into as many as 10 new stabbing deaths. Had the Lansing serial killer returned, or had someone else risen to take his place? It is important to note that although the task force was focused on primarily the stabbings of women, they did not state they believed that all were linked, though several were thought to be. And it is these that we will be looking into. In fact, 1984 would see a wave of violence on the streets of Lansing, further straining an already slammed police force. That wave would begin just a few months before the new year, on October 22, 1983, when police would respond to reports of a young woman screaming at an abandoned house, formerly located on the corner of East Oakland Avenue and M43, that was known to be used by sex workers and their johns. Though they would find pools of blood on the ground, it wouldn't be for 2 days when a tip led them to the then thicker woods behind the home, where they found the body of 22-year-old Tracy Forker. The mother of one had previously been arrested for sex work and was a drug addict, but was trying to break those ties before she had been stabbed to death. Her mother made a plea at a city hall meeting for Lansing to open a drug rehab clinic and decriminalize sex work, but little was done as the months went by and no leads came in. That would change the following February when the stabbed body of 29-year-old Bonnie Golan was found floating in the Grand River just northwest of the city by a railroad worker off of this train trestle. Police would assume that both murders were linked due to both being known sex workers and friends. Bonnie had last been seen sometime in early January and had no permanent address. Just a few days later after her body was found, Lewis Henry Robinson would be shot to death by police after they caught him in the act of stabbing 2 sisters at their apartment complex. Though they had no clue what led to this attack, police stated they found no connections to the previous 2 murders. Another stabbing death that was looked into as related was that of Douglas Perry on February 25th that year. Described as a quote, street person at that time, Douglas was walking in the parking lot near Friendship Circle in Michigan Avenue when he was repeatedly stabbed, and his body was dragged behind a showroom building that at that time was just west of here. However, when his case was solved in 1988, the court transcript would specify that Perry was a transvestite sex worker, killed by Luciano Lino and Horace Hoffman, who were clients of his and intended to rob him. Meanwhile, it was November 16, 1984, when 6-year-old daughter of Alfie Cooper phoned neighbors to tell them something was wrong with her mother in their apartment, located in a then still rural area just south of Potter Park. When police came over to investigate, they found 26-year-old Alfie dead of multiple stab wounds on her floor. Less than 2 years later, Medicare analyst Jeanette Kirby went missing while jogging in Riverbend Park on June 10, 1986. Sitting on 220 acres 10 miles south of Lansing, Riverbend Park was regarded as a safe space. Police stated they did patrol it regularly, so it was not being used as a party spot. A search party was launched when her car was found left in the parking lot. And on June 12th, a friend of the woman made a discovery he said was worse than anything he had ever seen in Vietnam. At the bottom of a ravine near the Grand River, Jeanette's stabbed and strangled body had been discarded. Her killer had cut her clothes off and tied her wrists together with plastic restraints, often used by police. Unfortunately, little other physical evidence remained due to a heavy storm that had blown through the night of her disappearance. It was just 1 day later that some people canoeing in the river spotted a second body caught on a log. Dental records would identify the body as 27-year-old Cynthia Miller, who had gone missing sometime after November 25th the previous year. Though too badly decomposed to determine if she had been cuffed, she was naked and had died via similar stab wounds. Fear spread like a wildfire, and gun sales skyrocketed. The task force investigated for a link between these two murders and those of Forker and Golan. That would change when police arrested Earl J. Fox and Robert Jones for the murder of Cynthia Miller. It was determined that Cynthia had been killed at Fox's house after she tried to charge him for sex. After they hid the body in the basement for a few days, the men would dump her into the river. The so-called Riverbend Murders Task Force would disband November 1986, with Kirby's murder going unsolved. It would be 9 years before the first of these cases would be reopened, as advancements in forensic science had investigators hopeful. Dawn Magyar's case was reopened, and a DNA profile of the killer was obtained. 3 years later, in 1998, detectives would trace down Robert Shaw, the owner of that gun found in the river, but would clear him from the DNA. He did tell them, however, the gun had gone missing, and he gave the name of a man who he believed stole it: Jerry Wingard. Jerry would receive a life sentence when the DNA linked him to Dawn Magyar, and he was investigated in the murders of several other women near his home south of Lansing, but no charges were ever brought forward for any further murders by the time he died in 2022. In 2001, Betty Jean Goodrich's murder would be reopened, and DNA evidence compared from the crime scene to a cigarette taken from one of the suspects in her murder and several others. A few months later, results came back posthumously proving that Charles Joseph Emery had killed the mother of four. Emery had been sentenced up to 60 years in a kidnapping case back in 1958, but had been out on parole at the time of her murder. He would get married and was free until his death in 1992. In 2002, DNA in the Roast and Nichols slayings was also run, but did not come back successful. As they had for decades, police still stated they believed two local brothers were responsible for the crime, along with possibly several others, but they did not have enough evidence. One of those brothers had been killed in an unrelated shootout, and the other had served jail time for a sexual assault. Jeanette Kirby's case would be solved in 2002, when David Drahim was convicted of her murder. First investigated back in 1990 after he was arrested for an attempted abduction of a woman 200 miles north of Lansing, David was in jail for that crime, but couldn't be tied to Kirby until Drahim's old roommate was interviewed and provided police with a plastic cuff from Drahim he had saved. Police were able to determine the grooves made by this cuff were identical to those found on Jeanette. In 2007, convicted serial killer Carl Watts would die of cancer behind bars. Before his capture in 1982, Carl would murder young Caucasian women by strangling, stabbing, drowning, or bludgeoning them, though he was seriously looked at in the murders of Marie Jackson, Diane Ozinski, Irene Waters, and Betty Jean Goodrich, and tentatively looked at in Karen Oatley's murder. Officially confessing to 13 murders, Watts claimed he had killed 40, and police suspected him in as many as 90 unsolved crimes. But he never confessed to any more before his death. Another serial killer questioned in Marie Jackson's murder was Henry Lee Lucas, but he was determined to not be responsible. Her murder was reopened the same year Carl Watts died, and 1 year later, police would get a DNA match. Carl Finch, who was a known acquaintance of the girl at the time, was linked via DNA, but sadly, he had taken his own life back in 1997. Leaving no answers as to why, or if he was responsible for any other murders. Since then, none of the other killings have made any progress in their cases, leaving 8 murders still unsolved. While almost certainly not all linked together, are any of those convicted for one of the solved crimes responsible for one or more of the others? If not, that implies there are still multiple men walking the streets responsible for these horrific crimes. And neither one of those options is a very comforting choice.